In the previous lesson, we looked at the Antichrist, the beast that we found in Revelation 13 and also in Daniel 7. And as I said, that even beasts have friends, and they themselves also call the beast. And that is in this particular lesson, we look at the beast of Revelation 13, verse 11. Revelation 13, verse 11 has a second beast coming up out of Revelation 13. But to start off, let's just quickly go and recap the first beast that we found in Revelation 13, the one that came up out of the sea, the one that had 10 horns. It looked like a leopard, had paws of a bear, the face of a lion, and we've referred to it a number of times in our lessons before. And we look at the first 3 verses of Revelation 13. It said, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw, and the beast rose up out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon the horns 10 crowns, and upon the heads the names of blasphemy." Continues there and with verse 2, and it says, "And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and it had the feet of a bear, the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power." So the dragon, which we know because of Revelation 17 is Satan, gives this beast its power, and his seat, and his great authority. And then the final verse of those 3 verses, "And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast." That was the beast that we looked at in our previous lesson. How that the whole world wonders after this beast. But then we find a few verses further on that Catholicism does not work alone. It has a partner, it has a friend. Let's have a look at verse 11. "And I beheld another beast coming out of the earth." Remember, the first one came out of the sea, this one comes out of the earth. "And he had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spake as a dragon." So this verse 11's beast, it has 2 little horns like a lamb, it speaks like a dragon, and it comes out of the earth. Well, when we looked at Revelation 17 verse 5, we could see the symbolism of water. "The waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues." So whenever it's describing water and a beast coming out of water, the beast comes out of a densely populated area where there are many people, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So it's very easy to see that maybe this other beast that comes out of the earth does not, well, first of all, obviously does not come from the same area, and secondly, probably comes from an area which was sparsely populated, very few people. Remember always, and you will find it a number of times within Revelation, water being many people, and then earth obviously being where you do not find multitudes, peoples, nations, and tongues. Revelation 13 verse 11, it comes up out of the earth. Now, this animal, this beast of Revelation 13 verse 11, is maybe a little bit more difficult to describe because it's a very short piece. With the Antichrist, we had all of Daniel 7 and all of Revelation 13 to try and help us identify this beast. But this one, there are just a few characteristics, so we have to look at them very carefully. Also, I do want to mention, as you look at the pictures that are used on the slide, within these slides, we do not really know how this beast looked. This is just an artist's impression of this particular beast. The only thing that we do know of this beast is that it has 2 small lamb-like horns, as far as the actual description of the beast goes. So we do not know if it looked like a ox or a ferocious lion or whatever. It doesn't describe, John doesn't describe this particular beast. It doesn't seem to be important in that sense. What seems to be important is the fact it comes from the earth, has lamb-like horns, and it does speak like a dragon. these little horns, very interesting little horns. And we will come back to them in a moment. Let's have a look at verse 15 and 16 of Revelation 12. We're just moving a little bit back, because here again we're going to find the concept of the earth as opposed to water. The serpent cast out of his mouth, the serpent, Satan, cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, and this particular use of the word woman seems to be a wife, a married person, so it can be a bride, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood or of the destruction. That particular Greek word of flood there, also referring to the word destruction. So the serpent wants to destroy the woman, and he causes this destruction to follow the woman. But what happens? The earth, wherever this animal is coming out of Revelation 13 verse 11, it also comes out of the earth. This earth helps the woman, and the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of its mouth. So what we do know of Revelation 13:11 and that animal, the beast that comes out of the earth, that this earth must be there to also help the woman, the bride, the church of Christ, the church of God. Let's have a look at some more of the distinguishing characteristics of this particular beast of Revelation 13 verse 11. It uses the word coming up. Now, if we go back to the Greek, it was a single word, and we look at the actual meaning of the word, anab ohino, and it means to silently, unnoticed, quickly, to rise up. It comes up silently, quickly, unnoticed, almost unnoticed. And so this particular power, which is described by this beast of Revelation 13 verse 11, must come up very quickly, quietly, almost unnoticed, and definitely unnoticed to be a beast. And what does this beast do? Verse 12 tells us, and he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him. The terminology here, before him, we will also look at exactly what that word before means. But this beast exerciseth all the power of the first beast. So we know that he comes up out of the earth, and this earth must also help the woman. And we know that he has little lamb-like horns, and that he has all the power of the first beast. Let's have a look at the concept of these horns, these little lamb horns. Maybe to try and find out exactly what it means, let's go all the way back to Deuteronomy 33 verse 17. What's the purpose of these horns? And his horns are like the horns of unicorns. With them he will push the people together to the ends of the earth. So the purpose of these horns is to push the people together to the very ends of the earth. We have another quotation there, Revelation 5 verse 6. It says, and I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne there stood a lamb. Remember, those were horns, but they were horns of a lamb. This lamb, of course, we know is Jesus Christ. And stood a lamb as it was slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes. And what was the purpose of this? Which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. So even these eyes and horns of Christ, or of this lamb, where Christ is the lamb, the purpose is to spread it through all the earth. Now I want to pause here for a moment, and I want to draw your attention to the concept that I do not want you to be worried that it uses similar terminology to describe beasts and also Christ. It says in Revelation that Christ is the Lamb, and not only Revelation, many other places also in the Scripture, especially in the the four Gospels. And Christ is the Lamb. When it comes to Revelation, and also if we look at the concept actually of a lion, we will find that he's the Lion of Judah. That was in Revelation 4. And then we find that Satan walks around like a roaring lion. Do not be worried. It says he walks around like a roaring lion. He can only imitate Christ. Christ is the Lion of Judah, but Satan wishes to be, so he walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So the fact that the similar terminologies are sometimes used, read them very carefully and see if they actually, if it is a lamb or just has little horns like a lamb. This is not the lamb. This is not Christ. This is a different beast. Let's continue with this beast. And if we continue with the following slide, we will notice that this beast, then with his little lamb-like horns, and the fact that he can also speak like a dragon, he exerciseth all the power of the first beast. And we also looked at, or we're going to look at the concept of before, the little word before. Let's just read that 12 to 14. Revelation 13, 12 to 14, and he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and we'll come back to that, and causeth the earth and them that which dwell therein to do what? Now he causes them to worship the first beast, the one that was found in Revelation 13, verse 1, whose deadly wound was healed. So the purpose of the second beast is to force all the earth and to push with those little horns to the ends of the earth and cause everybody to worship the first beast, the Antichrist, found in Revelation 13, verse 1. So now we know what the purpose of this beast is, and we need to scratch a little bit deeper to see if we can find who this beast is. And he doeth great wonders, continuing with the previous slide, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven and to the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth, by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by the sword, and did live. Do you remember our lesson when we looked at Daniel chapter 3 and Revelation 13? Making an image to the beast? Well, apparently, it's this animal, this beast, in Revelation 13, verse 11, that pushes the whole world to make this image to the Antichrist that came before it. If we look at the various characteristics then of this second beast, we will find the following. First of all, it comes up out of the earth. It's very important. We will find, if we do a complete study of Revelation 12 and 13, that it must arrive after the 1,260-year prophecy. We find that it must appear quietly and peacefully. It must help save the woman, and it must have lamb-like qualities. Who would this beast be? Well, maybe again I should first make a proclaim in my opinion, and then see if my opinion is actually factual or not. First of all, John Wesley says in 1754, he was studying the same piece of scripture, and he says, he has not yet come, though he can't be far away, because he must come at the end of the 42 months, or the end of the 1,260-year prophecy. So John Wesley in 1754 realized that this beast, though he hasn't appeared, and John Wesley couldn't find him, he had studied the scripture well enough to know that he must appear very soon. I personally believe, and as we start looking deeper into these characteristics, that it can be none other than America itself, and we will see why as we continue with this lesson. Firstly, let's have a look how America came into power. In 1775, the struggle for independence begins. Notice the very short and rapid time period that is going to follow over here. 1776, America declares herself independent. 1783, Britain recognizes this independence. In 1787, the framework of the Constitution is laid down. 1789, the Constitution of America is accepted. And 1791, the basis for freedom is laid down. In 1798, remember that was the year that France captured the Pope, and it was the end of the 1260-year prophecy. And also then in 1798, we find that this was the time when France recognizes America's independence. So America appears silently out of nowhere, very rapidly, at the right time in history. No other power seemed to appear at that particular time. But let's have a look what some of the quotations say. It says, I believe that the United States as the world's only superpower and the Holy See as the only worldwide moral political sovereignty have significant roles to play in the future. Their actions will impact the lives of people in all parts of the globe. Quotation there, given by who? By the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. Even though the Vatican is no more than just a few hectares, United Nations of America even has an ambassador at Vatican, an independent country, the world's smallest country. And we notice that there's a very close tie between America and the Vatican. Notice that it had two horns like a lamb. We've already spoken about that. Now, what are the lamb-like qualities of America? Does it have lamb-like qualities? Well, if you look at the Bill of Rights, you will notice a number of things. Firstly, within the Bill of Rights, in the First Amendment, it has very beautiful, soft, lamb-like qualities. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Remember, they had come, the Christians had fled away from Europe where they were being persecuted by Catholicism, and now they're within the new constitution, they say freedom of religion, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of people to peacefully assemble. So, if you look at this First Amendment, and we're not going to look at the Fourth and the Fifth Amendment, but even in the Fourth and the Fifth Amendment, very beautiful lamb-like qualities built right into, entrenched into America's Bill of Rights. So America very definitely did have little lamb-like horns. It has lamb-like speech. It arrived at the end of the 1260-year prophecy. Did America help the women? Of course, America helped Christ's church, God's church. When persecution was at its severest in Europe, and the flames are burning high in France, the Christians, the Protestants, fled by thousands and millions to various parts of the world, and especially to America. The uninhabited part. Remember, America was very sparsely populated, hardly compared to Europe, which was densely populated. Yes, there were already some inhabitants in America, but it was not densely populated like Europe. There were open prairies, and this sparsely populated area assisted the woman, helped the woman or the church by allowing a free place to live, to assemble, and to begin a new nation. 13 verse 11 again, and I beheld another beast come up out of the earth with two horns like a lamb, and it spake as a dragon. So while this lamb-like or lamb-like horns are maybe a way to fool us, we notice very clearly that the speech is not like a lamb. It speaks like a dragon. I also mentioned to you regarding that little word before. He exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him. It does not refer to the first beast that was before him in the sense of standing in a row. I'm standing in front or second and you are before me. It means in the presence of. In the presence of the first beast. So here we have America in the presence of Rome doing all of these things. In fact, if we read Revelation 13 very carefully, it was the dragon that gave its power to the first beast. And when the second beast arises, it is the one that moves the whole world to follow the first beast. A holy or unholy trinity. The dragon, the first beast, the second beast. But how will America, after speaking such lamb-like things within its Bill of Rights, be forcing the world to follow the Antichrist? Well, you see, slowly there has to be a breaking down of the wall between church and state. Because as long as that law stands very clearly, there will be freedom of religion. Is that wall being broken down? Is America looking at breaking down that wall? Well, there are certain people that definitely have that idea. This group may sound like a very radical group, but they are not small by any means. The New Moral Army in America. In the Cosmopolitan of May 1995, stated their concept of America. It says, first of all, the removal of religious freedom should be something to be looked at. And, of course, mixed in with very good things also, no abortion. It brings back the death penalty. It has a very radical concept of enslaving to replace prisons. And then, of course, the beauty of it, an autocratic, not democratic, an autocratic Christian government. This is not a small group in America. This is a large group in America fighting for these rights. If we continue, we find that Keith Fernier says the following. Yes, there is a wall that has been erected in our beloved land, America. Its attempt of religious freedom has resulted in greater devastation. It says the fact that it tried to bring in religious freedom actually had a greater negative impact on America. It is the so-called wall between church and state. And then he goes on calling for this wall to be broken down. Church and state must unite again. They must reunite so that the government can have full power over the church also. Dr. Baskin-Robbins, not a very unknown person at all in America. He's quite well known in America. There is a class of person, and notice his thinking, in this country that refuse to keep the Christian Sabbath, namely Sunday, except they be forced. And now he has a plan how to do this. He says this can easily be done. We are 20 million, excluding women and children, that keep Sunday holy. And if we say that we will neither buy nor sell from them, that we will neither be employed or employ them, we can eradicate this apostasy, and the whole world will keep Sunday holy. Does that sound as if America is slowly trying to push the whole world to follow the Antichrist and not to have religious freedom anymore? And we will notice slowly how the law changes time and time again. With every event that happens in America, the law changes to take away freedom from the American nation. When we look at the great papal system, it's difficult to believe that this great system can really be what we have already said it to be. However, if we look at 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 10 and 11, we see how it's possible for the whole world to be deceived. Because it says, because they receive not the love of truth, for this cause God shall send them a strong delusion that they should believe a lie. See, Christ has given us His Word. And He's given us all the information that we need to carry us through until He returns to fetch us. But because they did not love the truth, because Protestantism, even following after Catholicism, believes that these commandments of God can either be changed or they're not valid anymore. And so God sends a deception, a strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. It is possible that a great group of people can strongly be following a lie because God sends a strong delusion because they did not want to follow or love the truth. Revelation 17 verse 4, we find the harlot, the woman riding on a beast. And we find that she is again associated with the Antichrist. And as you read through all of Revelation 17, and starting at 13 and all the way through to 17 and parts of 18, that there's a very, very close connection in all its imagery that is used. Revelation 17 verse 14 says, and the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of the abominations and filthiness of her fornications. She's arrayed in what colors? Purple and scarlet, purple and red. Well, maybe it was just by chance that we noticed in that one slide that purple and red is a very popular color when it comes to Catholicism. But let's not try and read too much into that, although it does seem to be a color of choice within Catholicism. But let's look at the contrast between this woman and the curtain that separated the holy and the most holy within the old tabernacle system. Because that curtain was also made of purple and scarlet. However, it had another color woven into it. If we look at Exodus 26 verse 1, it says that that curtain is to be made of blue and purple and scarlet. So here's one additional color. If you want to move from the holy to the most holy, blue and purple, at least purple and red or purple and scarlet is not enough. There is also blue. What would blue represent? Scarlet or red. There are various verses in the Bible referring to the blood of Christ. There are the verses that refer to, though your sins be as scarlet, they'll be washed as white as snow. And there are many verses, and it's also a very obvious symbolism. The blood being red, being Christ shedding His blood for you and me. There are various verses in the Bible that look at purple as being a royal color. And again, that it's even in today's terms, purple is still a very royal color. But what does blue mean? Where does blue come from? Well, in Numbers, blue is mentioned 5 or 6 times throughout the all of Numbers. And every single time, except for the last time, it seems to be attached to something to do with the temple. Notice that even though a lot of the furniture was made of gold within the temple, the sanctuary of God, blue played a very important role. Numbers 4 verse 6. and shall put thereon the covering of badger skins, and shall spread over it a cloth wholly of blue. This was when they wanted to transport the Ark of the Covenant. And we go on and we look at some of the other verses. And the table of showbread had a spread of cloth of blue upon it. And if we look at the candlesticks, when this also had to be transported, it was covered with a cloth of blue. Blue, blue, blue. Seems to be very important in God's house, in the temple of God, in the sanctuary of God. Numbers 4:11, and upon the golden altar they shall spread a cloth of blue. So what does this blue symbolize the whole time? The fifth quotation over there, and they shall take all the instruments, not only those big pieces of furniture, but even the cups and all the other things used within the sacrificial system, and they shall cover them with a cloth of blue. So Christ seems to have something which is important when it comes to blue. And the last verse in Numbers gives us, or the last verse where blue is mentioned, gives us that answer. Numbers 15, verse 38 and 39. Here God gives an instruction and says to Israel, speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they will make them the fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations, and that they put upon the fringe of the borders a ribbon of blue. Why? Verse 39 will give us the answer. And it shall be unto you for a fringe, that ye may look upon it, look upon this blue cloth, and remember all the commandments of the Lord, and do them. And notice the rest of this verse. And that ye seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you used to go a-whoring. So it's trying to implement blue so that you do not become part of the prostituting of Revelation. Carry something blue upon your garments so that you will remember the commandments of the Lord. No wonder we don't find blue within the harlot. Remember what was found in the most holy, in the Ark of the Covenant, right inside the Ark of the Covenant? The commandments of God. And so, when there's no blue, it means that there's no keeping of the commandments of God. She does not like the woman in Revelation 17 to adhere to the commandments of God. What does Numbers 15, verse 40 and 41 say? That ye may remember and do all my commandments and be holy unto your God. He says, I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt, to be your God. I am the Lord your God. That ye may remember and do all my commandments and be holy unto God. You see, it is God that brings us out of bondage. It was God that brought Israel out of Egypt. It's God that gave us the commandments, the ones that He said that nothing will change before heaven and earth pass away. Not one single bit of my commandment will change. And that is why God in His temple includes blue, purple, and red. But the woman that we looked at, forming part of this whole Antichrist scenario, she only has purple and red. She does not keep the commandments of God. We spoke about the color, the blood of Christ, the scarlet color, the blood that is shed for you and me. We also looked at the concept of God's commandments being blue. And when you mix blue and red, you get purple. You see, it is impossible to only say, I accept the blood of Christ, but I don't want to follow His commandments, and yet hope to become a royal child of God. It is impossible to keep God's commandments without accepting what Christ did for us at the cross and hope that we will become a royal child of God. It has to be the combination. We are saved by grace, but we are judged by our works. We're not saved by our works. We're judged by our works. We're saved by grace. Christ died at the cross for us. That is, we have to accept that. We accept that Christ's blood cleanses us from all unrighteousness. And because of the love response, what did Christ say? If you love me, keep my commandments. Because of that love response, we then keep the commandments, symbolized by the color blue. And when we combine that, we become a royal child of God. You see, Christ did everything he could. Christ came down from heaven, from the presence of God, all the way to this earth, and died for you and me. That part has been done. And if it was not for that, you and I would be lost forever. In response, God is asking, He says, don't be satisfied like the prostitute, the whore in Revelation 17, with only red and purple, because red cannot make purple. He says, if you love me, keep my commandments. Make sure that there's blue also within your life. And mix those two colors. And become a child of God. A royal child of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. If we want to be a child of God, we need to, in response to what He has done for us, out of love, as He asked, keep His commandments. It's embedded in all of Revelation. I trust as we look at the last few of the DVDs left, that it will bring a complete picture of Christ's intention for us and what Christ really wants to do for you and me when we keep His commandments. Thank you for watching this DVD. Thank you for joining me for another session. This particular lesson is called Drinking from the Golden Cup. Now, 2 DVDs ago, we had a look at the Antichrist. The previous DVD, we had a look at even beasts have friends. But now we're looking again a little bit at the Antichrist. And drinking from the golden cup, we will start noticing what all has been poured into that golden cup. That golden cup that's presented to the world to drink from. And the question is, are we drinking from that cup, also noted in the Bible as the cup of fornication? Let's begin in this particular study by looking at Daniel 1, verse 1 and 2. It reads as follows. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. So some of the vessels which were found in the house of God, in the temple belonging there to the Israelites and the temple of God, was taken with when they were taken into captivity. And we find that these vessels, at first, they are stored somewhere there in Babylon, in maybe in safekeeping. However, later on, these vessels will be taken out again. Notice what Ezekiel says in chapter 22, verse 26. Her priests have violated my law and have profaned my holy things. They have put no difference between the holy and profane. Neither have they showed difference between the unclean and the clean. They have hid their eyes from my Sabbaths, and I am profaned among them. It says that they showed no difference to the holy things and that was not holy. When God pronounces something holy, we must not show an indifference to it. When God pronounces something sacred, it is sacred. If we want to treat it as sacred or not, does not change its holiness. If we call this the Holy Bible, if we want to believe it, if we want to treat it as a Holy Bible, does not take away or add to the fact that it is the Holy Word of God. And so it is with all of our beliefs and all of the things that we choose to partake of, whether or not we want to believe it or do not want to believe it, it doesn't make any difference to when God has pronounced something holy. And that's the warning given in Ezekiel, that they put no difference between the holy and that which was not holy. Notice what it says in Ezekiel 22, verse 31. Therefore I have poured out mine indignation upon them. I have consumed them with fire of my wrath. So there is a consequence, a result. If you do not want to keep holy what God has pronounced holy, there's a judgment that comes together with such an action. And what was that judgment? Therefore I have poured out mine indignation upon them. That says God in Ezekiel 22, verse 31. When we go to Daniel 5, verse 1 and 2, and we've also taken a quick look at this particular piece in one of the previous DVDs, we find the following story. This was at the end of the reign of, not Nebuchadnezzar, but Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar had died by now, but this is the end of Babylon's rule. And in Daniel 5, verse 1 and 2, we find the following words. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives and his concubines might drink therein. What did Belshazzar do? He sent them in the middle of this great party that they were busy holding. It was a festival day, and he brings them while he's busy drinking. Notice that he's busy drinking. He's already got some wine within him. And so it clouds his judgment. And what does he do? He goes and fetches the vessels of God to come and drink wine from them during this festival. It seems, if we could divert for one small moment, it seems that here is a very good example of clouding of judgment when wine seems to be consumed. Though this verse cannot be taken to forbid the use of wine, it's interesting to note even in Leviticus chapter 10, we do not have any slides that go along with this particular piece, but you can read it. It's about the first 10 or 11 verses in Leviticus chapter 10 and chapter 11. And you will notice the story of Aaron and his two sons. And they were given very specific instructions what to do and where to take fire from. And what do? They apparently had consumed some wine before they came to work in the house of God. And it clouded their judgment. And they go and take fire from a different source that God had instructed. God had holy fire. He called it holy fire. But they decided it doesn't matter if God calls something holy. And they went and took different fire. And as they were about to come and burn incense before God with an unholy fire, God consumed them with lightning. And if you read the rest of that particular story, you will notice that their father Aaron was not even allowed to show any sign of remorse for the rest of that day. He just had to continue with his work. Why? Because God had consumed them, because they had not listened to what is holy. When God pronounces something holy, we should be very careful. And here we have the situation in Daniel 5. Belshazzar is having this wonderful festival. He's already consumed some wine, and he then decides to drink from the vessels of God, God's golden cups. And it says in Daniel 5 verse 5, in the same hour came forth fingers of a man and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. He could not see the whole body of whoever was busy writing against the wall, but he could see the hand of the one that wrote. The king's countenance is changed. And this particular verse is one of my favorite verses in Daniel, because I can't find a better description of somebody which is terrified, petrified. Daniel 5 verse 6. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosened, and his knees smote one against each other. You've often used the same kind of imagery, speaking about your legs shaking. Well, his legs smote one against each other when he saw the writing on the wall. And as he looks up against the wall and sees the writing of the wall, he has to come to grips with what God has pronounced in that same hour. It says in Daniel 5 verse 18, O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty and glory and honor. But look what it says directly after that in verse 22. And thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this. Yes, Nebuchadnezzar knew who was the God of heaven. He spoke to Daniel and said, your God of heaven. And he realized that the God of Daniel was the true God. When he saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, he had no doubt who was the true God. And Belshazzar, his son, knew all this. But despite the fact that he knew this, he continued to do what he decided to do. We read there, it says that you took that which belonged to God and you used it in a light-hearted, everyday manner and disgraced it. And in doing so, you elevated yourself against God. Therefore, He sends you this message, the message that was written on the wall. Because you took that which belonged to God. It was only a cup. It was only a golden cup, which used to be in a temple back in Jerusalem. But because he took that which belonged to God and used it and disgraced it as he chose, God pronounces a judgment against him. How careful we need to be when God pronounces something holy, but we want to disgrace it. Daniel 5 verse 25 and 28 then reveals what is written on the wall. It says there, and this is the writing that was written, Mina Meter Tikel Iparson. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mina, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tikel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. His kingdom, everything that he owns, remember, he owned a lot. He was throwing a party for 1,000 of his friends. And his kingdom and everything that he has is taken away from him because he had no regard for that belonged to God. When we look at Revelation, we start noticing that it is not only in Daniel that we find a golden cup, but no, in the hand of a woman, which the Bible refers to as a harlot, there is also a golden cup. She rides upon the animal with 7 heads, the beast with 7 heads. And let's read together there in Revelation 17 verse 1, where we begin with this particular story. And there came one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment. Notice there's a judgment again. The judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Remember that part, that sitteth upon many waters. We'll come back to that just a little bit later when we start showing you some of the symbolisms. And we start finding that it reflects back, Revelation 17 reflects back to Revelation 13, where we studied the Antichrist. And the word Babylon starts coming forth in Revelation 17 regularly again. The Tower of Babel. What was the purpose of the Tower of Babel? Well, first of all, it was going against what God said. God made a promise that He will not destroy this world with a flood again, but man chooses to build the Tower of Babel, disregarding again what God has said. Why is it, if we look at this picture, that we find that Mary, or also referred to as the Lady of Lebanon, we find her on top of a Tower of Babel. One of them back in Lebanon itself was built in 1904. In South Africa, there was one built in 1991. And more recently in Malbarton, in 2002, they built the same structure. Why is Mother Mary, part of Catholicism, placed on top of the Tower of Babel? It starts letting us wonder if there is some form of association. Look what they write regarding one of these towers. They start off by saying Our Lady of Lebanon, and a bit later on they also make mention thereof that it is the Virgin Mary, and how big and how wide and how long and how heavy, etc. it was. But then notice the last sentence in that quotation. It's very important. It says that the Lebanese Christians, as well as the Druze and the Shia Muslims, have a special devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. I thought that Catholics have a devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, to quote their terminology. But even Christians, even Muslims have a special devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Is this somehow forming part of Babylon? Why is she on top of the Tower of Babel? The Tower of Babel was built directly it went against everything that God had promised. God makes a promise, but man ignores it. In the same way, God makes many promises in His Word. Whether or not we believe it is our choice. Whether or not we want to accept the promises in God's Word is our choice. Because we may not believe it does not make the promises any less valid. When God makes a promise, you can trust God to keep His promise. And yet, sadly, when they were busy building the Tower of Babel, they totally ignored the concept that God had said, I will never again destroy this world with water. And they started building the Tower of Babel. Well, there's another interesting building that we find in Europe, the European Parliament. And there are many people that say that it has a resemblance to the Tower of Babel, the unfinished Tower of Babel. Some of the architecture has also been associated with the amphitheaters and the ruins of the amphitheaters. However, whatever the truth be, it's very noticeable that there is some form of a resemblance even between the building of the European Parliament and the Tower of Babel. Amazing if you look at the photo, what you can do with photographics. However, it doesn't mean that the European Parliament is Babylon, but it does start making one wonder what all goes on inside of that particular building. there is a different series of lectures known as God's Final Call by Mark Woodman. And if you would really like to know more about these topics, that's maybe the lectures that you should get. However, returning back to Revelation 17, the woman sitting on the beast with 7 heads. Is it by chance that the €2 of Greece, the one used in Greece, has a woman on the beast? Well, of course, we also know that it formed a part of an original legend, a woman which supposedly was raped by the beast. And so, yes, it even forms a part of their legends. But where do these legends come from? Who started those legends when this information of Revelation was already available? It's even on some of their phone cards if you go to Europe. And if you have a look at some of the stamps, you still find the woman on the beast. Take a very careful look at that particular stamp, and you will notice that underneath the beast, there is water. You notice the little dolphin? So there are waves of water underneath the beast. You remember the verse that I said you should remember? That the beast was upon the waters. Notice how much of the biblical imagery they bring out into something as plain as a little stamp. However, if you take a look at that stamp again and count with me how many waves do you find inside of or at the bottom below that beast. On the front side you find 4 and to the back you find 3. 7 waves. Well, let's remember that and let's read on a few other verses. We'll come back to that again. Revelation 17 verse 5. And upon her forehead, this woman that's sitting on the beast, was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. If she is a harlot, and she's also the mother of a harlot or of harlots, does it mean that she has daughters? Daughters that she has forced them to drink from the same cup, that still hold on to some of her beliefs? Revelation 17 verse 18. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Which city was that? That was the city of Rome. Revelation 17 verse 9. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads of that beast are the 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. We know that Rome is built on 7 hills. It doesn't take a lot of research to get that information. But let's go back to that stamp. Notice all the imagery built into one single stamp. A woman sitting on the beast, the fish at the bottom or the dolphin, implying that it is water. The beast was upon the waters, and also the 7 mountains. So much imagery built into one little stamp. What is it that captures the imagination? Is this really meant to be the old legend, the mythological legend of a woman that sat on a beast? Or is this the woman of Revelation, which they are in Europe placing upon a stamp? But in contrast to this woman, there is a pure woman, God's church. In contrast to the one that not only is called a harlot, but the mother of harlots, there is a pure woman standing